Hi! In this video, I'll show you how I made this beat using only drum samples. This was a challenge by Jason Raphael, who asked me if I could make a beat using only 6 percussion sounds. I thought that sounded interesting, so I accepted his challenge. I posted the results on Instagram and you guys seemed to really enjoy it. Some of you also asked me to do a tutorial, so here we are. Quick note, all the samples used in this video comes from my newest sample pack, Juicy Fresh Drum Kit Volume 1. And you can get it for free if you join my Patreon within August 21. I'll leave a link for that in the description. When I make music, I like to begin with laying down a foundation. I find it's a lot easier to make everything else click into place when you have figured out what are going to be the most important elements of your track. So I started out laying down a kick and a snare. I knew for a fact that these elements were going to be my most prominent ones, so it was nice to get them down first so I could build around them. Then the next step was to figure out what I wanted to emphasize. I decided to layer my kick with this percussion sample, which gave it more texture. I also copied and reversed it, leading into these two kicks, making them stand out more. Next, I knew I wanted something that could serve the purpose of a crash at the beginning of the loop. And even though cymbals are considered percussion, it sort of felt like a cop-out here, so I wanted to do something different. I took this sample, and then I stretched it, giving me this odd, scary sounding result. Then I placed it at the beginning and the middle of the loop. I also copied and reversed it, neatly wrapping it all up. Already here, the beat is starting to take shape and come alive. The stretched keg percussion is doing a great job giving us a sense of time and helps us keep track of where we are in the loop. And honestly, I feel this is what music is all about. Finding out what you want to emphasize and just build around that. It would sound very boring and lifeless if everything were equally loud and had the same layers all the time. Yeah, no thank you. Now that the foundation was there, it was time to fill in the details and make it come alive. If I'm being honest, this is usually where I go completely overboard and add way too much, to the point where it's overbearing instead of interesting. So it was nice to make music to a prompt that limited the amount of sounds I were allowed to use for once. When I only had 6 percussion sounds to work with, I knew I had to make them count. The next sound I added was this boop sound. I decided to put it on every offbeat, bringing some consistency to the table. I altered its velocity a little bit and put on a delay. And suddenly it did quite a lot of work. Then I added this subtle sound to fill in some of the gaps. I just felt I needed something in the background. Then after hearing through the loop a couple of times, I felt it needed more momentum, so I added this sound. It ended up sounding a little crazy, but it did its job. At this point, I wanted to add something melodical, but I wanted to stay true to the challenge, so instead of using a synth, I grabbed the most tonal percussion sound I could find in my sample pack, which was this cowbell. And I'm very pleased with how it turned out. It melded so well with the other elements of the track. After adding all my 6 percussion sounds, I still felt something were missing. And it was the 808, of course, which is something I would normally add a lot earlier in the process, as I do consider it a part of the foundation. I just thought I could manage to make a beat without one, but it just ended up sounding so empty. So I had to cheat just a little bit and add one. I made a very simple pattern with the 808, mostly just following what the kick was doing, with a few ornaments here and there. But it made a huge difference. The beat now felt complete. The arrangement of this beat is sort of incomplete, as I only intended to use it for my Instagram video. But what I did do was create an intro, a part A and a part B. The intro consists of the cowbell, the stretched percussion and the snare, and they're all fading in with the help of a low-pass filter and an automated reverb. Combined, it sort of sounds like it's moving in closer from a distance. Then on part A, the rest of the elements kicks in, except the momentum percussion, which I'm saving to pick up the pace in part B. Finally, just to add some extra spice, I played around with automating some delay alongside the reverb and low pass to make some makeshift transitions, since I wasn't allowed to use any effect samples. When it comes to the mix, it was mostly just setting the levels right and EQ things so they blended nicely together, which are by far the most important part of any mix if you ask me. But I did do some other more spicy things too. On the kick, snare and cowbell, I used a transient shaper, which makes controlling the attack of those elements so much easier than using a compressor, for example. Transient mastered by Native Instruments also has this nice limiter built in, which I like. The cowbell does have a bit more processing than the rest of the elements. I wanted a more aggressive sound and I needed it to stand out more in the mix. So I applied some distortion with Camel Crusher, a little bit of OTT, some stereo effects from Severum, and some compression. Now let's talk a little bit about the routing here. If you watched my video about my template, this might look familiar to you. The kick and snare are routed to this bus called drums pre, while all other percussion goes to this percussion bus before it also ends up in drums pre. The reason I set it up this way is because I wanted to sidechain the percussion to the kick and snare. Now, the drums pre bus goes to two other tracks called dry and wet, which I use for parallel processing. These two then finally go to drums where it all comes together. The dry signal goes straight to drums without any effects, while the wet signal is heavily distorted. This allows me to blend in the exact amount of distortion I want on my drums, with just a single fader. On the drums bus, I have a compressor to glue it all together in addition to those effects I automated earlier. On this track, I wanted a different sidechain for the kick and the snare, so when I wanted to sidechain something, I routed them both to that signal. Then I just set up two limiters like this and adjusted them to taste. To make sure that there would be no trouble between the kick and the bass, I sidechained the lowest frequencies of the 808 to the kick. The way you set that up is to load up a peak controller on the kick, right-click the band in the EQ of the 808, select Link to Controller, then select Peak Control Peak. Then you set the bass to 50% in the peak controller so it doesn't do anything when the kick is not playing. Pull down the volume so it ducks away when the kick is playing, and then just set the decay and tension to taste. And there you go. Finally, I have two sends here, a long and a short reverb. One with an OTT and one with a Camel Crusher. It's just a cool trick you can do to manipulate the signal before it passes through the reverb. And that's pretty much all the ins and outs of this beat. Thank you for watching to the end of the video. Before you click off, if you enjoyed it, do give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and I promise to bless your feed with great FL Studio content. If you're interested in getting your hands on all the samples and the project file to this beat, among a lot of other cool things, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you can check out my Patreon page. Link in the description. Also, if you have any suggestions on what type of beat I should create next, feel free to leave a comment down below and maybe I'll take you up on your challenge. See ya!